We moved here in 2016, and when we moved in, there was this really old, dilapidated shed thing that was completely coming apart at the seams. My name is Matthew, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been building things.
I brought a sledgehammer from the car if you need it.
We might need it. I'm interested in how people interact with spaces, and I love seeing how materials and systems can come together to create the built environment. Last year, I ended up with a lot of free time. My business was struggling from the effects of the pandemic, and I started designing a garage apartment in my backyard using SolidWorks. I'd been thinking about this for a while, but I never had enough time to make it happen. I wanted to build a new 3-car garage with a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment on the 2nd floor. Ambitiously, I wanted to build the entire structure in 100 days for under $100,000. Ideally, the apartment, when completed, would generate enough income to pay the entire mortgage on this property. In my case, the apartment needs to generate about $2,500 a month. Obviously, we wanted to offset our cost of living and have a place to park cars so they wouldn't get broken into when they were parking in the street, but everyone is talking about passive income, with rent houses or living on the cheap in a tiny house or going off-grid and living in a van or a camper, and I love these stories. I think we're all trying to escape the race and live cheap or, even better, live free. This is my attempt to live cheap and not go broke in the process. A ton of our neighbors already have these little garage apartments, and the reason that we moved here is specifically because it would allow for a full-size, completely standalone apartment. After doing some research, my wife and I pretty quickly realized that just renting the unit out like a standard, empty apartment wasn't going to work. In order to attract top dollar, you have to get more creative. My wife and I live in Fort Worth, Texas. We live in an awesome little historic neighborhood with older historic homes just south of downtown Fort Worth. It's a great place to live, and there are a lot of things going for us that really made this project work. Number 1, access to credit. This is a huge one, and it's not sexy, but having access to capital is super, super important. We tried to refinance our home and pull out some equity while rates were super low, but because our income was all screwed up from 2020, and almost no bank would talk to us. We approached several banks and they asked us why we made less money in 2020. It didn't matter that we had excellent credit, money in the bank, no debt, income from the last decade, 1 down year, and the banks were convinced that we were a bad bet. I ended up calling a neighbor who was willing to work with us, and we secured a line of credit against the equity in our house. I've heard some horror stories about HELOCs, but with predatory rates and weird penalties, but ours was great. Basically, a good fixed rate, no early payoff penalties, and no fees. Number 2, zoning. Our house is zoned for a second residence on the same lot. And this is a lot more common than people realize, especially in these older historic areas. Back in the day, they used to mix everything up. Businesses and single-family homes, duplexes, quadplexes, rooms for rent inside of a bigger house, whatever. You do you. Now, in modern zoning, everything is pretty separated. Industrial businesses are over here, and single-family homes are over here, and duplexes and condos over there. Our historic zoning in our neighborhood was a mixed blessing. We had to get permission for everything, but that also protects the character of the neighborhood. Some places will let you add a mother-in-law suite, but not let you add a full kitchen, or there's a neighborhood nearby where you can't have any gas or high voltage appliances in the kitchen, so you're basically left with a hot plate and a toaster. I really wanted to make this a totally standalone apartment with a full kitchen, a full laundry area, and if you're thinking about doing a project like this, you need to do your research and figure out what's allowed in your city. Every place is going to be different, and local codes really, really matter.
How'd we do?
Fort Worth specifically, number 3. Fort Worth specifically has a lot of visitors and it's growing. And when I say Fort Worth, I mean Fort Worth. I don't mean Dallas or Frisco or Arlington or Grapevine or Colleyville. I'm talking about Fort Worth proper. And people have no idea, but Fort Worth is the 12th largest city by population in the United States. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, including Dallas and Fort Worth and all those other cities, is number 4, behind New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. There's always people looking for a place to stay for a few weeks or a few months, and more specifically, our house is really close to TCU, so there's students and always looking for a place to live. There's stuff happening here all year round, which is really important because in order for this project to make sense, it has to be utilized, it's gotta be busy, people have to be coming year round. Within a 2-mile radius, we have 4 giant hospitals. So we have traveling doctors and nurses, as well as medical students and doctors in residency. It's a revolving door and all those people need places to live. Fort Worth also has world-class art museums. We have killer independent restaurants and retail destinations like off Magnolia and the South Main District. There's just a ton of super cool stuff happening all the time. Another thing that makes Fort Worth really interesting is that it's almost perfectly aligned with the average cost of living in the United States. That means it's a good example of what's possible for a really broad cross-section of the country. If you're looking at a bell curve of the least expensive and most expensive places to live, Fort Worth is right down the middle. It's a really good example of what's possible, not just in Texas, not just in a big city, but really all over the country. Number 4, we have a pretty small lot, but this house was really well laid out and used really efficiently, and it was affordable enough for this project to make sense. It's got a ton of killer trees, but none of them in our yard, meaning more usable space to build and the added benefit of having really nice tree cover. The house is also hugging one side of the lot, meaning we can have space for a driveway and a garage at the back. Another unique thing is this really great city-maintained alley. Because of the alley and some zoning rules, we're able to build all the way up to the edge of our lot without any setbacks. Another thing which we had no control over was the location of the electrical lines which run through that same alley. Our yard has overhead electric service, meaning the electrical wires and the transformers are all on poles that run overhead, not underground. The first time I saw this property when we were just looking at it, I remember walking back through the alley and noticing that the electrical poles were on the opposite side of the alley, the far side of the alley, away from where our lot was. And when you build, you have to stay a certain distance from those poles so the utility company can keep servicing them, but also for your own safety. And thankfully those wires are on the opposite side of the alley, so we didn't have to worry about getting them moved or staying out of the way. I'm going to talk a little bit more about utilities and the site layout for this build later, but I've learned from past experience with other projects that messing with electrical utilities or building too close to them is a really easy way to go broke. The last thing that this house got going for it was that it was a clean slate. All the construction I've done has been new construction, and I really didn't want to worry about a bunch of hidden problems and surprises during renovation. My goal is to build a rental unit that pays my mortgage in order to turn this house into an income-producing property where I live in the original house for free. The whole thing has to be affordable enough, and the rental unit has to be popular enough that it can float the entire note. And for us in this house, we need to clear about $2,500 a month to pay our mortgage and our taxes and our insurance and our utilities. So whatever we build has to generate about $2,500 a month. I also have a job, so it has to be easy to maintain in my spare time. In the next few videos, I'm going to walk you through everything. The things I did right and the things I would do differently next time. I kept track of all my expenses and I'm going to break down those costs. At the end, I'm going to show you how well or how poorly the unit is performing and compare this asset class against other creative living arrangements like van lifing or tiny house living. If you like this video and want to keep up with the build, like and subscribe. If you're working on a project or just want to talk shop, I want to see what you're doing. Leave me a comment And if it's something I know something about, I'll upload a response. If you like the video, share it with someone. If you didn't like the video, share it with someone you don't like. Either way, it really helps other people find this channel and hopefully not make all the same mistakes that I made. I'm excited to talk about this project with you, and I'm excited to show you how it all came together. I think you're going to be really surprised by the finished product. So until next time, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe. So this is what quicksand looks like. I had to dig myself out a second ago.
Did you get stuck?
I did get stuck for a second.